and good evening to everybody watching this quite important video. Now, it is a subject that has cropped up time and time again in the last few years. It seems that most Mark 1 focuses, they have lots of common problems now. Most of them I've spoken about, some of them I haven't. That will be coming up in future videos and definitely future talks. But there is one issue that has been, above all else, probably the biggest safety factor. And we're not talking about the car cutting out and not restarting or not starting at all from cold, or I don't know, failing to put their windscreen washer fluid on the windscreen, or a bit of a leak in the footwell. No, we're talking about something quite serious here, and that is the rear lower control arms that the springs sit inside and that are connected to the hubs from the middle of the subframe. And they are getting to an age now where if you have a Mark 1 Focus with your original rear lower arms, and you will know if they're the originals because they will be absolutely rusted to hell. And even the best ones I've seen at shows that they are the originals, they do look original. They look as if they were put on quite a few years ago. The other telltale sign is the state of the 4 bolts. So you've got 2 inner bolts and you've got the 2 outer bolts that bolt through the bush into the hub, and the 2 camber bolts that bolt to the subframe. They are the bolts, the special cambered bolts that adjust your rear wheel alignment. Now, most people are not aware about this, but when you take your Focus for a 4-wheel alignment, you expect all your wheels to be aligned properly. And most garages, because they know people have not got a clue and not got any sort of idea if they're going to do this job or not, most of the time, some decent garages will say, we can't do the rears because the bolts are seized, which is absolutely the truth, to be honest, in 95% of cases. Very rarely do they move, and if they do move, wow, yeah, that's really lucky. But most will do that job, will not do that job, and tell you that they have done that job, and you've still got bad issues with your tyres at the back, and your handling is certainly not going to be there. And when it comes to a Mark 1 Focus, handling is key. At the end of the day, you're not going to have a true Mark 1 unless it handles like it's on rails. And if yours feels wallowy, I would like to know what you're thinking of doing about it, because there'll be a few issues. Train arm bushes for a start, but that's a different subject for another day. We want to concentrate in this video on the subject of these rear arms getting so rusty that this happens, and has happened a lot of times in the last 3 to 5 years. And it's this picture. Look at that picture. I mean, literally, it snapped in 2. And usually that is very common where they snap. They snap usually where the rear anti-roll bar link goes through. It is a weak point. There is clearly extra stresses that the rear anti-roll bar places on an old rear arm. That one, strangely enough, it's rusty. It's not the worst one I've seen by a long shot, and I'm going to show you one in a second. But if you take note of this picture and you just look, I mean, someone's obviously put new bushes on that rear anti-roll bar link. It's just ridiculous. But that is what we call a stress fracture. And that stress fracture, I don't care what anybody says, that was not happening 10, 15 years ago, unless you drove it like an absolute idiot, smacked your wheel into a curb. Well, there'll be a few things that'll be bent. Your train arm, train arms, which are very thin pieces of steel, they'll bend and probably snap, most likely snap. And you'll be having a few other things snapping as well. These things were not happening even 6, 7, 8 years ago, even to the oldest examples. Now they're happening all over the place. And it's been going on for a good 3, 4, 5 years now. That is a stress fracture because it's rusted too much. And it's caused a weakness, and a weakness that has been exploited. maybe by a pothole or by a speed bump or just a general bang as you're going down the road. The car's dealing with undulations in our very bad roads in the UK. If you're in another bad climate, North America, sometimes it can affect these cars. If you're in Europe, you probably won't have this problem, but we certainly have this problem over here, and it's a certain issue. Now, what is the most dangerous thing that can happen when this scenario happens? Well, for a start, if the arm splits into two and your car is probably, if it's got the original rear arms, most likely the springs have not been changed, although there are some actual evidences that people have changed their springs without even removing the bottom arm. You need hydraulic spring compressors to push the spring in and then slot it in. My God, you've paid a fortune for that tool. You obviously know somebody who's got a tool. Well done. But what you've done, you've just put a very, very strong spring on an already weakened arm. That is not a good way of doing things. And that is probably necessitated in this failure, because if you look at this picture, that spring does not look as old as the arm. Someone's changed the spring and not changed the arm. They've most likely not took the arm off, because you can't. Even at probably 10 years old, they would have seized, all those bolts would have seized in the bushes. The 4 bolts that I've talked about, seize in the bushes. You have to cut them off. It's a no-no. It would escalate a spring job. Oh, the customer's like, I just need a new spring doing. And the shop will go, well, we've had to change everything. And the customer's going, what? I didn't ask you to change everything. I'm not paying that. Bit of a problem for garages. A serious problem. And they don't, because the customer doesn't understand, they often have to go through getting very expensive hydraulic spring compressors to do the job. Not every garage has got that facility. And the problem is with that, with weak springs, is when they get old, they get weak and they get lower. The car is lower to the ground. Now, this might be an issue on lowered Mark 1s, because we know that plenty of them are on lowered springs. That means that your ground clearance is clearly a bit tighter. You imagine that snapping and digging into the road. Now, in this example, in this picture, that anti-roll bar link may have just pushed that arm to cracking and fracturing, right? But it's also saved that person's life, because if you're traveling at speed when that arm snaps, if that arm did not snap in that area, well, it will dig into the road, and that's you doing spinnies, taking out other people. You could die. It's as simple as that. It's that serious. I've known people where they've had rear arms, bottom arms go on different cars. Rover P6s that I've owned one, and they are bad, very bad for doing it on the rear suspension. And we actually lost someone in the club because they're very immaculate P6 with a Rover V8 decided that its rear elbow wanted to crack, dig into the road, and the car went spiralling off an A road, and it was at speed. And if you do that at speed, you're dead. I'm sorry, there's no comeback, even in a Mark 1 Focus. You'd have to be extraordinarily lucky to survive that. Do you really want to take a risk? Well, let's look at some of the other pictures before I come and say what I'm going to say next. This is another picture, again, of a typical rear axle on a Mark 1 Focus. This is really typical. Someone has replaced the spring again, but not, obviously the arm's not been changed. The anti-roll bar link has been changed, but that arm looks worse than the one in the first picture. It's flaking, it's weakened. I'm sorry, that's a fail. That's an MOT fail in my book. That is a corroded suspension arm. It needs replacing. There's no way. There's MOT testers who are doing this to this day, who are passing these cars. I'm sorry, if you've got a Mark 1 with rear arms like that, you need to change them, and you need to pay the money if you can't. And I'm sorry, but people are not going to like this, but it's your safety. This is a serious issue. It's as serious as someone putting aging tyres on their car or part warns. Part warns should not be allowed. They should be banned. The amount of tyre blowouts that I see from really bad tyres, it's untrue. And part warns. People say they're quality control checked. Some places do, some places don't. But this is just serious. But that is ready to snap. That is ready to snap. And I bet you that car's probably been scrapped. If it hasn't been scrapped, its arms would have probably cracked by now. Probably. You are asking it to crack in the area of the anti-roll bar link, like in the first picture, but if it cracks in another different place, that could be even more serious, because your arm could actually drop into the ground, spring goes flying, you know, your car's going to go out of control. And I'm going to show you the worst picture of the three. I do hope, for a start, just a disclaimer here, these photos were in amongst a couple of Facebook groups, but I'm not quite sure who the owners of them are. So if this is your car, don't be embarrassed, because, well, these cars probably don't exist. But if it does exist and you are watching this, please don't do a copyright on me, because I don't know whose pictures these are. I really think this is important. This is not I don't know whose cars these are, and nobody can identify them. But this picture here was off a Facebook group, and this is quite a severe one. This was on How Bad Cars Can Rot group or something like that. And I saw this picture ages ago and I saved it, because this is another level. That's just absolutely horrendous. So we've got the issue of cracking, but we've also got the issue where it's all old. Look at the subframe, look at the hub, look at the link hasn't been changed, that's the original. Look at the spring. The spring's still in one piece. Usually the springs actually snap if they get that old. But even that old spring has managed to push the seat spring cup away from the lower arm. That cup is welded. It's like one, it is actually one piece. It's a one piece steel arm, but it's literally blown it off like it was just a bolt on, add on, and it's literally gone through it. You imagine if that spring had actually, well, hit the ground, it wouldn't have been that bad at all. But I am so amazed that arm hasn't cracked. Some of them don't crack. Some of them look actually really good and they crack. And some of them look like that and they don't crack, but they go in other ways. That's horrendous, that is. Whoever's car that is, I think this is a scrap car, because looking at the state of it, it'd be very unlikely that that's still on the roads unless it's had a lot of work done to it. So that leads me to, really, what can I do about it? I hope, and maybe I may have the opportunity of doing this, it just depends how logistics play a part in this whole situation. But I might have the opportunity of showing you how to do a rear arm replacement job. Just the rear lower arm. The subframes usually need a bit of a wire brush. Most of them that I've seen need that. To do it at a garage, you've got to be prepared for a big bill. You're going to have to replace, unless the springs have been replaced, 2 new springs, 2 new rear anti-roll bar link bushes, they're cheap, and 2 decent rear lower arms. You may want to buy the kit and have all the other control arms. There's 2 more on each side. They've got the banana arms, and then you've got the little radius arm and your train arm bushes. Some people do the whole thing. Subframe off. The whole thing comes off in one frame. That's a bit intimidating. But if you want to have a go at just cleaning everything else up as best as you can, but just replacing the spring and the rear lower arm, because there's no point in putting an old spring back on. I think that's just as bad. I've seen that as well, where people have replaced the arms but put the springs back. Why do that? Just change the rear springs. They're not expensive. Aftermarket ones are certainly not expensive. You change both them things with new bolts. You should buy all new bolts, because you've got to cut the old ones off. I wouldn't even bother. When I come round to doing this job at some point in the future, I am not doing that, okay? I mean, I could show you, but the bolts will shear. So I will literally just grind back all the bolts, and then I will slot in, well, you have to punch the rest of the bolt out. You have to cut the heads off and then punch. You have to cut off both sides. What you'll find is a bolt and nut kit, because the subframe will have welded nuts on the back side. So you're looking from the back side of the car forwards. The welded nuts are on the back side. So you've got 2 for the camber bolts and 2 for the ones at the bottom of the rear hubs. Okay. You will have to cut them welded nuts off, because the new kit will come with a new bolt and nut, because you can't take it off without cutting the head off the bolt and the welded nut as well. Really, I should have gone down to my car to show you that in detail, but the truth is, I think you get the picture. Then you can punch all those bolts out, get an air punch. I mean, you could do it by hand, but I would really get an air punch if you've got access to a compressor tool. And then you're free. Those arms will just come straight out. Okay, bit of hammering maybe. And be careful, because the springs will be under pressure. You've got to kind of support it quite nicely. Probably do one arm at a time. It's as simple as that. And you can do that. Now, this is the work I did some years ago now. It felt like some years ago. That was September 2020, around about that. That was 3 years ago I did all that, and I've had to just, well, some things have changed. I've put a standard exhaust back on the car, not that, which was a catback system. But I did the whole thing in one go. All the arms, tram bushes, springs, and the banana arms. Simple as that. I had to adjust the springs again. But I would like to say that I did the bottom arms myself. I'm obviously lying, because I didn't do the bottom arms. I had to pay a lot of money for my local garage to do that job for me, because at the time in 2019, when the car failed its MOT for corroded rear lower arms, good job my garage saw to this. I didn't realise how bad they were, because I wasn't really into the car at this stage. I wasn't really delving in, but I was aware that they were rusty. I didn't know how bad they were, but they said, you've got to change them. And they had to cut all the bolts off. It was a nightmare. I think they had to cut a couple of bolts off, but all the welded studs are still there. So they obviously had some success getting the original ones out. But I was lucky. The only thing I've had to do since that job was change the rear springs, because they weren't sitting at the correct ride height really. There is a way of doing it, but often you can't do it. Trust me, you can't do it. Design ride height setting. Try it. Some people can, some people can't. The bushes are just not as tight as what they maybe should be, aftermarket ones. So that's the end result really. We have the 4 bolts that you can see in the picture. The 2 center ones on the subframe clearly. I'm glad that I can show you this picture, because it shows you very clearly where they are. They are the 2 camber bolts that are used to adjust the rear tracking alignment of those rear tyres. It's as simple as that. And then the 2 silver bolts that are on the hubs that you can see right next to the wheel, they are the other bolts that you need to take off. Those are the 4 big bolts. I really do hope people listen to this. If you can do it at home, if you feel capable, get a grinder, get some good trolley jack, some blocks of wood, and a couple of days maybe. Take your time. You'll have to get it tracked, so naturally a garage can track that for you. If you can't, just be prepared for a few £100 worth of work. But I think it's so serious now that this isn't a case of looking after Mark 1s. It is about safety. And I hope I've highlighted an issue that may make people a little bit wary. And I don't apologise for making people feel a little bit uncomfortable in their Mark 1s. It's not particularly intentional. It's just maybe the reason you're worried, it's because you know that those arms are not that good. If you have a query, I can't really people have sent me pictures before saying, are these arms good? You can tell sometimes by look, but as I said, some arms that look good crack, some that don't look good, they don't crack. But in these examples, they have. And to shocking consequences. Luckily, I've not heard of anyone in the Mark 1 community that has been involved in an accident as a result of this. But near misses are happening all over the place. So I see a lot. I see too many Mark 1s. I think the amount of Mark 1s that I see that have had this work done to them is probably 1 in every 10. Maybe 2 in every 10, but not enough. Nowhere near enough of them. It worries me that people are using these as daily drivers with kids and not in general use with arms like that. Yes. It's probably one of the reasons currently why so many of them are going to the scrapyard. It may have been the Achilles heel for my car. If I wasn't into cars, I'd have certainly scrapped the car. If I wasn't a car enthusiast or just interested in the car, I'd have scrapped the car because the bill was eye-watering. There was a few other bits that needed doing as well. Rear brake pipes. I had to pay for them to be done because I wasn't confident again. Anyway, these days, I do it myself. I've never done this job on a Mark 1, but I know how it's done. I tell people how it's done, and hopefully I'll be able to show you. So hopefully it inspires more people to at least change these arms. There's nothing else on that suspension that I think is a massive safety problem. In fact, I don't think there's anything on a Mark 1 Focus that poses a current problem over and over and over again. I just hope that we get to the stage where no one has an issue or has this issue on their Focus, because if you replace them, that's probably another 10-15 years, because that's how long they generally last before they start looking suspiciously fragile, and they can be. You take care, guys. I will see you very soon.